Well, I'm normally speaking to people who have never heard of simplified communications or plain English and have to be informed and convinced, and they're usually in business, and I feel like a missionary. I always say it's like doing missionary work. But here I'm with the converted, and so I'm very happy, and I hope that I'm not going to trod ground that you all know. I tried to eliminate all of that. I make a distinction in the way I talk about plain English. I don't just say plain English because I was oriented to the field by a company in New York that sort of pioneered it in the United States, and they always involved design as well as plain language writing. So we called it simplified communication. So that's my terminology. And as you see, I make a distinction between microsimplification and macrosimplification, which gets to the point of how my practice has evolved over the years, and a procedure I've developed and trademarked that I think really has the potential for extending the principles of simplification across a company, and hence the sustainable nature of the clarity that we can achieve. So instead of simplifying one document at a time and achieving incremental progress in the field, this would be something where we can make a much greater impact within a company or a civil organization, and perhaps achieve a much more higher impact that's noticeable to the public or to whomever is using that organization's materials. So this is the traditional simplification. It's just, a terrible document that's too much information. It's been purged of unnecessary content. It's reorganized, rewritten, and it looks like that. So I call that micro-simplification. One document at a time, a few documents together. This is a typical document I did for a New York City Human Resources Agency. I like to count words, and you'll see where that begins to matter as we get into my macro simplification process. 538 words in the before version. It's a little game I play with myself, but I also do it to educate my audience that the worst and greatest offender of plain language is volume, excess volume. Redundant information, too much unnecessary, meaningless content. So we reduced by 42% this one document. I literally did the rewrite overnight as a demonstration for a workshop I was doing with the City of New York agency. So that was a typical project, and this is, I call that the one-off simplification up to about 10 pages, and that's a very important project to do. It's a document that's been giving a company a lot of problems. It's high usage. It's important for the customers or the audience to get it right. But it goes back into a system of communications that may be rife with complexity, and may be so that the same customer is getting one clear document that we've been fortunate enough to be able to simplify, and then the next thing they get in the mail they can't understand, and it all comes from the same company. Doesn't make any sense. So how do we achieve simplicity over a larger swath of materials in any given organization? And this became important to me. I've just listed all the various documentation that I've worked on over the years and that typically my customers and businesses have. What I began to realize when I was working with partners who were branding experts, they were designers and branding consultants, and I was the simplification specialist, and we had a common practice, but I would work on their branding projects and help to sell them. And I would realize that when they created a new logo for a company or a new name, that company, and it would often be a very large corporation, would reprint every single piece of paper in the company, from the sales brochures to the checks. And I thought, it just was an epiphany for me. It was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks one day. Here I am in the simplification business, doing one document at a time, and I thought, what a waste. This is a perfect opportunity for a company to step back and say, do we really need all this information? Who is it doing any good for? What do we even have? They don't do that. They just tell everybody to reproduce what they've originally got. And occasionally they'll do an audit of this set of documents or that set of documents, but are very rarely taking a look at everything they've got. So I decided to create a process extending the principles and techniques of simplification to a large number of documents. And if any of you saw my poster in the lobby, it says, simplify one document, macro simplify 1,000. And that's the idea, that you can take the principles of simplification and apply them across a very large body of work. So macro simplification was something I trademarked, and I'm very glad I did, because I was able to now to bring it into a new company with a much bigger platform that hopefully will be able to do this within a large number of companies. This is sort of what the very first macro simplification project I did. This is what you get in most companies. The customer being what we called chaotic bombardment, being bombarded by all these different publications from various parts of the organization, every kind of format and size and shape imaginable. And this is what we did to simplify that system. That was at Merrill Lynch, the financial company in the United States. They were trying to save money, and this is the critical part about macro simplification. The first time I used it, thankfully, the company had as its goal to cut 30% of its marketing budget, because they were trying to compete with online brokerage firms, and they couldn't, because their overhead was so high, and they were looking everywhere to cut costs. So I came in with this process, and we were able to analyze the content just as you would on an individual document. Analyze the content that was flowing through about 750 pieces of sales literature that were being used in their retail offices all over the country. And we decided what was core and what was non-core. And we eliminated all the non-core, took the core information and transformed it into a new content architecture. We couldn't take the documents, those 750 pieces, and just try to improve them each one by itself. We needed to look at this body of information as a system. And that's what all of the communications in most companies are. They're a system. It's a corporate asset, information. And it's conveyed through various documents, and you have to transform that system by looking at it in its totality. So we reduced the number of documents by 60%. And when I say documents, they were mostly brochures and retail literature. 60% was gone, and we now had a much better, more effective body of literature that was filling gaps. For example, all of the previous material had been product focused, and we and the company wanted to make it more customer focused. And so we were able to show them that because they had been producing so much information and putting so much budget to it that was useless, they now could spend a lot of more money and still save $20 million by filling some gaps. They could provide more educational information for customers, more needs-based information. How did all these financial products fit into the customer's needs? So basically, it's not just a reduction, it's an improvement. So reasons to macro simplify. Too much information. Every company has it. There's not a company except possibly Apple and Nike that I could go into that don't have too much information flowing through it to internal and external audiences. And half of it, or to 30% of it, is non-core, what I would call non-core. So they're paying to produce all this information, and it's doing them no good. That leads to excessive communication costs, of course. And then there's typically no rational structure or for collateral and other types of communication. For example, you could walk into any major corporation in the world and ask them for their graphic standards manual, and they'll give you something this thick, or it'll be pages long on a website, and it will tell you where every pixel of information has to go. But ask them for content architecture or a publications or publishing plan, they don't have it. And forget about writing style manuals or anything like that. Content is simply not king. They start with design. The whole industry was built around design, and then they add the content later. And it's not as important as the design and the impact of the visual impact. We flip that, and we start with the content, and we make the design serve the content. Another reason to macro simplify is usually there's no drivers for new collateral. People will produce something new because they feel like it. They think they have a great idea, and that goes along with no plan. So you can see where the money starts building up. I'm just going to run through these because I want to get to the process itself. Sorry. Okay, the macro simplification process, this was my way of applying the principles of simplification across a very large number of materials. The very first thing we do is we take either all the materials in the system, and if it's too much, if it's thousands or too many hundreds, we take a very liberal sampling. And then we do the same kind of content analysis. I literally, on the first project for Merrill Lynch, scanned every page of the 750 documents because I was trying, it was the first time I was doing it. I will never do that again, but we documented. I wanted to be able to report back to them everything that was wrong with this system, and I was able to do that. We could justify everything we were going to cut out, and that was a very important way to gain a buy-in to the reduction in content. So we go through the process of identifying core and non-core information. We eliminate the non-core with the agreement of the company, of course, and we give them an auditable list of what we've taken out, so it's not like we're going to take out anything essential. And then we take the core content that's left and re-architect it into a plan that will become their Bible, that will become that publications plan that says, here's the core messages we need to get out to these audiences. These are the media and the formats through which we will convey those messages. And that becomes a long-term marketing plan. When people change at the top, when mid-managers change, the whole system isn't going to change with them. It's part of the company. It's made for that company and its customers. And then we do one very important other thing, and I think it's relevant to something Justice Kirby said yesterday, and that is we get to the heart of the business decision-making by providing a financial impact statement at the time we make our simplification recommendations to the company. So when we have done our interviews at the beginning of the project, before we begin our initial content analysis, I will have interviewed marketing people, product management people, systems people, because they often control the form of a lot of communications in a company, and legal, because we're always going to be having to run things by legal. We also interview and gather information from all of the cost centers in the company. And sometimes the people in marketing communications don't even know what all their costs are. They're scattered in different places. Their operations, their systems, they're in various places. We gather that information from their own sources, and we use it to develop a financial impact statement that we give to the company and tell them, this is what this system of communications is costing you. That's rarely done in my business, in either plain English or in my previous business of just plain old marketing communications. People always talk about, what's your budget? If you have it a little more, I can spend it better for you. But nobody ever says, I can save you money. So we're telling them what it's costing them to produce this huge amount of information, and then we project the costs of our simplified architecture and show them the difference. And this is all before they have to make any decisions. We're giving them basically a consultant's report on their system of communications. And we're telling them how they can simplify it and exactly where, and then showing them what the new system's going to look like, and this is what it's going to cost if you want to do it. And I'll tell you, there have been a lot of CEOs who have raced to the exits to try to get this implemented as fast as they can when they realize how much the current complex system of communications is costing them. So, and then finally, we produce prototypes because buy-in is one of the most important things when you're making a drastic transformation like this. The recommendations we make tend to be radical. We're telling them to reduce things drastically, and we're changing things, transforming them. So we have to convince them, and not just the senior level executives, but the mid-managers as well. So we produce, design and write completely prototypes that are in with their own content and their own branding, and we show them what simplification looks like, what it could look like, and that tends to get them very excited and get them over the hump. We move in the right direction when we get to that point in the project. This was the Merrill Lynch project, just to show you how we developed the savings. We collected and analyzed print production costs, which is the obvious thing everybody knows. And then we extrapolated that to determine a replacement cost for all these materials. We used a standard 9% of printing costs to gauge development costs, and estimated fulfillment costs is 8%. And then the final result was $15 million in printing saved and $5 million in development. I want to get to something. I'm going to skip this. I'm just going to skip it because it's more important for me to get to something else, and I know I'm going to run out of time. I'm not very good at keeping time. This is one other project that shows you how we eliminated content. It was a very formal way we did it. It was a billing project for a small insurance company in the Midwest. This is what their bills looked like. They had 5 lines of business. They all were this terrible. We did a content disposition because we had about 15 owners of these 5 business statements, auto, home, life, agriculture, commercial. And we provided pages and pages of lines taken from the actual sampling of the bills. This is what we're going to eliminate. This is what is useless. This is obscure, unhelpful, the number was inoperative that was on the bill. We just went on and on, but we always justify why we're taking something out. And then we took the core content that was left, and we provided a very clear outline for each one of the lines of business and what their bill would look like, no matter how variable the content was from life to agriculture. And so they knew exactly what was going to happen before we put pen to paper to write anything or design anything. And then we were able, having rid ourselves of so much content that was useless, we now freed up enough real estate to be able to produce a very nice statement that was clear and understandable. And the contrast between the before and after was pretty clear and pretty dramatic. This is what I wanted to get to that's most important. The ROI of Clarity. Clarity, I've stolen the name. I really didn't steal it from you, but I just joined my practice with Language Line Solutions, which is the largest translation company in the United States. And we've created a product called Language Line Clarity, which is simplified communications. And we're going to translate into plain English documents that have been submitted to them for translation into 10, 20, 50 languages. They translate into 240 languages. So they are recognizing plain language as as another language, a distinct language, and we're able now to show their clients, we're adding in to printing costs, translation costs. So the ROI of Clarity is when we reduce word count and page count, and we will reduce translation costs dramatically, and I'll show you that in another slide. Development and updating costs get reduced, printing costs, fulfillment and mailing, calls to customer centers, which is a huge thing. They drop, as many other speakers have noted, by great percentages when documentation is clear. And that can be translated into real dollars and cents savings. The financial impact for client, I typically get a 25 to 30% reduction in volume of content in any project that we do in macro simplification or even micro. But macro, for sure, 25 to 30%, sometimes it's as high as 50%. So I will go in and publish that figure to a client and then begin to calculate what we might save them. We did a cost analysis for Language Line using New York City agencies and their price per word for translation as our base. And we said if we were to do 1 million words, translate 1 million words for them, which would be a fairly typical project, what would our costs be for translating into 6 and 9 languages is what they typically do. At 1 million words, you can see what the costs are. If I was to get a 20% reduction in the number of words, you can see the costs going down quite dramatically. When you get to a 50% reduction, it's almost a 50% reduction in translation costs. That's just translation costs, just translation. Now, what does it cost for me to do that simplification work? Roughly, this is what it would cost on 1 million words. That translates into about 1,000 documents. And I would say these were the costs that it would be. If I was to reduce the number of words, I would be reducing the number of pages, and it would reduce my costs. You subtract my costs from the cost of translation, and the only place where you're still spending money, the agency is still spending money, is in 6 languages with only a 20% reduction in words. If they translate those same documents, which are 20% reduced, they translate them into 9 languages, they're going to save $22,000. So they're going to get better documents. All their documents are going to be simplified and in plain language, and they're going to spend the exact same amount. They're going to spend $22,500 less on translation than they would have spent before. They're not spending a dime for my services. And when you get a more dramatic reduction in volume, the savings are huge. Now, after my services are rendered in subsequent years, that savings obviously increases by reducing my fee from that amount. So you can see the kind of, this is what we've been talking a lot about at the conference, is how do we get to the heart of business decision making? Everyone knows that you change people's minds in business with the financial bottom line. And this is a process that marries the good to have with the must have from a financial and financial stewardship point of view from the perspective of the business. So I'm going to stop there. There are other case studies, but I think we've got the gist of it across. And if there's any questions afterwards, I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.